Ever felt watched on a lonely highway at 3 a.m.? Marcus Thompson had been hauling freight across America's highways for 23 years when he picked up a load in Nevada that would make him hang up his keys forever. What started as a routine cross-country run turned into a nightmare that left him questioning everything he thought he knew about the roads he traveled thousands of times. The interstate system isn't just 48,000 miles of asphalt connecting cities. It's a web of shadows where the rules of normal society break down completely, where predators, both human and otherwise, move freely between jurisdictions in the dead of night, and where a driver's greatest enemy isn't mechanical failure or bad weather. It's the realization that some things following you in your mirrors aren't supposed to exist at all. Tonight, I'm sharing 10 of the most disturbing encounters ever reported by long-haul truckers. Stories so terrifying that veteran drivers with decades of experience refuse to take certain routes anymore. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales. These are documented accounts from professional drivers who've seen things that will make you think twice about every late-night road trip you've ever taken. Welcome to Silent Souls, true trucker horror stories. If these stories give you chills, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because every week I bring you the most terrifying true stories that most people never hear about. Drop a comment below if you've ever experienced something unexplained on the road. And don't forget to like this video if you want to see more trucker horror stories that will keep you awake at night. Marcus Thompson had driven his Kenworth T680 through every kind of hell the American road could throw at him. Blizzards in Colorado, dust storms in Texas, and near misses with careless sedans weaving through traffic on I-95 for 18 years. He'd called the highways home, logging over 2 million miles with a steady hand and a sharper eye. The solitude of the long haul suited him. The hum of the engine, the endless ribbon of asphalt, and the occasional crackle of the CB radio were his companions. He'd heard his share of trucker tales, ghostly hitchhikers, phantom rigs, strange lights in the desert, but Marcus was a practical man. He chalked those stories up to fatigue, bad coffee, or too many hours staring into the dark. That is, until February 22nd, 2023, when he parked in a remote dirt pullout in eastern Washington, a decision that would unravel everything he thought he knew about the world. The day had started like any other. Marcus picked up a load of heavy machinery in Spokane, bound for Seattle. A straightforward run along I-90 he'd done 100 times. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with the promise of fog, but the forecast was clear enough for him to make good time. By 10 p.m., he was ahead of schedule, cruising through the flat, empty stretches of Adams County, where the nearest town was a good 50 miles in any direction. The road was a desolate strip, flanked by scrubland and the occasional cluster of gnarled trees, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. Marcus's eyelids grew heavy, the monotony of the drive lulling him toward sleep. He knew better than to push past his limits. Fatigue was a killer on these roads, so he scanned for a place to pull over. Just past mile marker 137, he spotted a dirt pullout, a patch of hard-packed earth barely visible in the gloom, tucked between a shallow ditch and a line of low hills. It wasn't a proper rest area, but it would do for a few hours of shut-eye. Marcus eased the Kenworth off the highway, the tires crunching over gravel as he maneuvered into the pullout. The spot was isolated, no other vehicles in sight. The only sound, the low rumble of his engine idling and the distant whistle of wind through the hills. He cut the lights, leaving just the amber glow of his parking lamps, and checked his surroundings one last time. Nothing but darkness, the kind that swallowed everything beyond the truck's faint illumination. Satisfied, he locked the doors, drew the heavy curtains across the cab's windows, and climbed into the sleeper berth. The bunk was cramped but familiar, a cocoon of worn blankets and the faint smell of diesel and leather. He set his alarm for 5 a.m., enough time to rest and still make Seattle by noon, and let the gentle vibration of the idling engine lull him to sleep. An hour later, Marcus snapped awake, heart pounding. A faint sound had pierced his dreams, a metallic click, like someone testing the driver's side door handle. He lay still, ears straining, telling himself it was nothing, just the truck settling, or a branch brushing the cab in the wind. But the sound came again, deliberate and rhythmic. Click, click, pause, click, click. It was coming from the door, no mistake. Marcus sat up, his breath shallow, and reached for the flashlight he kept clipped to the bunk's edge. The cab was pitch black, the curtains blocking all light, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the engine. He flicked on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the dark, and crept to the driver's seat, keeping low, as if some instinct warned him not to be seen. He parted the curtain just enough to peer out the side window. The pullout was empty, the dirt undisturbed, no tracks or shapes in the faint glow of the parking lamps. The hills loomed in the distance, their outlines blurred by a creeping fog that had rolled in since he'd parked. The door handle was still, no movement, no sign of tampering. Marcus exhaled, trying to shake the unease. But then another sound, came a faint tap from the passenger side, like fingers rapping lightly on the glass. He swung the flashlight across, heart in his throat, but the window showed nothing but fog and darkness. The tapping stopped, replaced by a new noise, a soft, scraping sound, like something dragging along the truck's undercarriage, moving from the rear toward the cab. Marcus's pulse raced. He grabbed the tire thumper he kept under the seat, a heavy steel bar used for checking tire pressure, but handy as a weapon in a pinch. The scraping grew louder, now accompanied by a faint hiss, like air escaping or a whispered breath. The truck rocked slightly, just enough to feel it in the springs, as if something was climbing up the side, testing its weight on the running boards. Marcus gripped the thumper, his knuckles white, and considered his options. He could hit the alarm, flood the area with noise, maybe scare off whatever or whoever was out there. But the isolation gnawed at him. If this was a person, they weren't here for a friendly chat, and if it wasn't, he didn't want to think about that. The scraping stopped, replaced by a series of soft thuds along the roof, like small feet stepping carefully above him. Marcus froze, the beam of his flashlight trained on the ceiling, following the sounds as they moved toward the front of the cab. His mind raced, kids, animals. But no kid could be out here, miles from nowhere, and no animal moved with such deliberate precision. The thuds paused directly above the windshield, and for a moment, the silence was deafening. Then, a new sound, a wet, smacking noise, like hands pressing against glass, rhythmic and insistent, coming from every window at once. Marcus swung the flashlight toward the windshield, expecting to see something, anything, but the curtains blocked his view. He didn't dare open them, not yet. The smacking grew louder, faster, a cacophony of unseen hands slapping the glass, the truck rocking harder now, as if surrounded by a swarm. Marcus's breath caught. He slammed his hand on the alarm button. The horn blared, a piercing wail that echoed across the empty hills, and the interior lights flared, bathing the cab in harsh white. The sounds stopped instantly. The rocking ceased, and the silence returned, heavier than before. Marcus sat, panting, the thumper still in his hand, waiting for any sign of movement. Minutes passed 5, then 10 and nothing. No taps, no scrapes, no thuds. Just the hum of the engine and the distant howl of the wind. He considered starting the truck and driving off, but exhaustion and fear kept him rooted. If something was out there, he didn't want to meet it on the move. Not in this fog, where visibility was down to a few feet. He decided to wait for dawn, when light might reveal answers. To stay alert, he turned on the CB radio, hoping for the comfort of another driver's voice. But the channels were dead, not even static to break the silence. He kept the flashlight on, its beams sweeping the cab's interior, and checked his phone. No signal, not even a flicker of bars, despite the satellite system that should have worked anywhere. The isolation felt like a weight pressing in from all sides, as if the pullout existed outside the world he knew. Another truck's headlights swept past on the highway, their glow briefly cutting through the fog, and Marcus felt a surge of relief. He wasn't alone out here, not entirely. The other rig didn't stop, its taillights fading into the mist. But it was enough to ground him, to remind him that the world still turned beyond this cursed patch of dirt. He leaned back, keeping the thumper close, and resolved to stay awake until sunrise. The hours crawled by, each minute stretching into eternity, his eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker in the fog. He tried to rationalize it may be local kids playing a prank, or coyotes, or his own tired mind conjuring threats from nothing. But the precision of the sounds, the way they encircled the truck, didn't fit any explanation he could muster. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the fog, Marcus's tension eased slightly. The world was coming back into focus, the hills taking shape, the highway visible again. He stepped out of the cab, tire thumper in hand, and began his walk-around inspection, a ritual as familiar as breathing. The air was cold, damp with mist, and the pullout looked as empty as it had the night before. No tracks, no debris, no signs of life. He checked the tires, the trailer, the couplings, all routine, until he reached the driver's side window. His breath caught in his throat. Smeared across the glass were dozens of tiny handprints, no bigger than a toddler's, pressed in clusters, as if multiple hands had slapped the surface repeatedly. They weren't just on the driver's window. Every window, even the windshield 10 feet off the ground, bore the same prints, some smudged as if licked or dragged, others crisp and clear, their delicate fingers etched in the morning dew. Marcus's stomach churned. He circled the truck again, looking for any sign of how they got there. The dirt around the pullout was soft from the night's moisture, but there were no footprints, no ladder marks, no evidence of anyone climbing the rig. The prints were impossible, too high for a child, too many for a single person, and too precise for an animal. He grabbed a rag from the cab and wiped them away, the cloth coming back, damp and streaked with a faint, oily residue that smelled faintly of decay. His hands shook as he climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled onto I-90, the pullout shrinking in his mirrors. He didn't stop until he reached a bustling truck stop in Ritzville, where the noise of other drivers and the glare of fluorescent lights felt like a lifeline to reality. At the truck stop, Marcus sat in a booth, nursing a black coffee, trying to make sense of what had happened. He overheard other drivers talking about strange encounters, lights that followed too closely, voices on the CB with no source, but none mentioned handprints. He kept quiet, not wanting to sound unhinged, but the image of those tiny hands burned in his mind. When he finally delivered his load in Seattle, he took a day off, something he rarely did, and scoured online forums for similar stories. He found accounts from other truckers who'd parked in remote Washington pullouts, describing unseen hands, strange noises, and a sense of being watched. Some called it ghosts, others something older, tied to the land itself, spirits of lost children or worse, entities mimicking innocence to lure the unwary. The experience changed Marcus forever. He avoided I-90's back roads after that, sticking to well-lit rest areas and major routes, even if it meant longer drives. The highways, once his sanctuary, now felt like a liminal space where the rules of reality bent, where shadows held secrets that daylight couldn't erase. He kept a second flashlight and a spare tire thumper in the cab, and he never parked without checking the windows at dawn. The tiny handprints had left more than marks on his truck. They'd etched a warning into his soul, a reminder that some stretches of asphalt belong to the silent souls that linger just out of sight. Ever parked in a spot that felt too quiet? Northwest drivers, seen odd marks on your rig after a rest? Share Belloweir, all on these roads together, and your story might save another driver's peace of mind. Elena Ramirez had logged over 1 million miles in her Freightliner, Cascadia, a sleek machine that had carried her through the chaos of East Coast highways for 15 years. From Miami's sun-soaked sprawl to the icy interchanges of Maine, she'd seen it all: reckless commuters, jackknifed rigs, and storms that turned I-95 into a gauntlet. At 42, Elena was a veteran of the road, her nerves forged in steel, her instincts sharper than the blade she kept tucked in her boot. The solitude of the long haul was her sanctuary, the hum of her engine and the occasional chatter on the CB radio her only companions. She'd heard the tall tales, ghostly hitchhikers, phantom trucks, voices from nowhere, but Elena didn't buy into ghost stories. Fatigue and bad lighting could make anyone see things that weren't there. That was until a muggy August night in 2022, when a voice on her CB radio turned her world upside down, leaving her questioning the very airwaves that connected truckers across the lonely miles. It was just past 3 a.m., and Elena was rolling through Baltimore's industrial outskirts on I-95, hauling a load of textiles bound for New York. The city was asleep, its streets empty, save for the occasional flicker of a streetlight or the glow of a distant warehouse. The air was thick, humid, the kind of night where the heat clung to your skin like a second shirt. Elena's cab was a cool oasis, the AC humming softly, her dashboard casting a faint green glow over the controls. Her CB radio, switched off for hours to avoid the usual chatter of bored drivers, sat silent beside her. She preferred the quiet on these late runs, letting her mind wander to the rhythm of the road, the white lines blurring into a hypnotic pulse under her headlights. She was just past mile marker 57, the city's skyline fading in her mirrors, when the CB crackled to life. The sound was sharp, unmistakable, cutting through the silence like a knife. Elena froze, her eyes flicking to the radio. The power switch was off, the dial dark, yet a low, drawling voice filled the cab, clear as if someone were sitting in the passenger seat. "I ain't got no panties on," it said, the words dripping with a slow, southern twang, intimate and teasing, like a whisper meant only for her. Elena's heart skipped, her hands tightening on the wheel. She scanned the road ahead, empty. No headlights, no taillights, just the black ribbon of asphalt stretching into the night. Her mirrors showed nothing but darkness, the city's glow swallowed by the distance. She reached for the CB, yanking the cord from its socket, expecting silence. But the voice came again, louder this time, repeating the phrase with a mocking lilt. "I ain't got no panties on." It wasn't just the words, they carried a weight, a presence, as if the speaker knew her, saw her, was watching from somewhere just beyond the edge of her high beams. Elena's breath caught, her pulse hammering in her ears. She checked the radio again, still off, unplugged, dead. Yet the voice persisted, now joined by a faint static hum, like the sound of a distant storm rolling in. She slammed on the overhead light, half expecting to see someone in the cab, but it was empty, the sleeper berth's curtains still, the air undisturbed. Elena floored the accelerator, pushing the Freightliner to 70 miles per hour. The speed limit be damned. The road was a tunnel now, her headlights barely cutting through the humid haze that had settled over Baltimore. She kept glancing at her mirrors, expecting to see something, a rig, a car, anything to explain the voice, but the highway remained deserted. The voice didn't stop. It shifted, growing softer, almost seductive, repeating the phrase in different tones, as if testing her reaction. "I ain't got no panties on," it drawled, then giggled, a high-pitched sound that sent a shiver down her spine. She tried the CB again, flipping it on and off, switching channels, but the voice followed, locked onto her like a signal that wouldn't quit. She keyed the mic, her voice steady, despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Who's this? What's your 20?" she demanded, hoping to provoke a response, to prove it was just some prankster with a boosted radio. Silence answered, but only for a moment. Then the voice returned, no longer playful, but cold, deliberate. "I see you, Elena," it said, her name slicing through the static like a blade. She dropped the mic, her hands trembling. No one on the road knew her name. She used her handle, Iron Rose, on the CB, never her real one. The voice repeated, "I see you," each word slower, heavier, as if savoring her fear. Elena's mind raced. She'd heard stories of CB hacks, truckers picking up weird signals in remote areas, but this was different. The voice wasn't just clear, it was personal, invasive, like it was inside her head. She checked her phone, no signal, despite being near a major city. The GPS flickered, showing her miles off course, then back on I-95, as if the road itself was playing tricks. The voice kept talking, now mixing in fragments of other conversations, snippets of her own voice from past CB chats, her laughter, her complaints about traffic, all woven into the static. It was as if the radio was pulling pieces of her life from the air, replaying them with a twisted edge. She pushed the truck harder, hitting 75 miles per hour, the engine roaring as she barreled toward the next exit. The voice grew louder, more insistent, now chanting her name in a chorus of tones, some deep, some shrill, some eerily like her own mother's. "Elena, Elena, Elena," it sang, the words blending into a hum that vibrated through the cab's steel frame. She glanced at the passenger seat, half expecting to see a figure, but it was empty, the seatbelt neatly coiled. Yet the air felt heavy, like someone was breathing just behind her, close enough to brush the back of her neck. At mile marker 62, she spotted a 24-hour truck stop, its neon sign a beacon in the fog. She pulled in, tires screeching, and parked under the brightest floodlights she could find. The voice stopped the moment she cut the engine, leaving a silence so deep it felt like a vacuum. She sat there, gripping the wheel, her breath shallow, waiting for the voice to return. It didn't. The truck stop was quiet, a few rigs idling in the lot, their drivers asleep or sipping coffee inside the diner. Elena grabbed her flashlight and knife, stepping out to check the truck. The CB was still unplugged, its wires intact, no signs of tampering. She walked the perimeter, looking for anything, tracks, marks, anything to explain what she'd heard, but the asphalt was clean, the night still. Inside the diner, she ordered coffee, her hands still shaking as she recounted the experience to herself. The waitress, a grizzled woman with 20 years on the road, overheard her muttering and leaned in. "Heard something on the CB, huh?" she asked, her eyes knowing. Alina nodded, hesitant, and the waitress lowered her voice. "Happens out here sometimes. Voices that ain't there, saying things they shouldn't know. Old drivers say it's the road itself, carrying echoes of folks who never made it home." She slid Alina a fresh coffee on the house. "Don't answer back. Whatever you do gives power." Alina didn't sleep that night. She waited until dawn, the first rays of sunlight breaking the fog, before climbing back into the cab. The CB stayed off for the rest of the run to New York, and she avoided I-95 through Baltimore after that, taking longer routes to steer clear of that haunted stretch. She scoured forums later, finding similar stories, drivers hearing voices on dead radios, names called out by unseen speakers, messages that seemed to know too much. Some called it ghosts, others a glitch in the airwaves, but all agreed it was a warning. The highways carried more than freight. They held echoes of the lost voices lingering in the static, waiting for someone to listen. Ever heard a voice on the CB that felt too close? Maryland drivers, got any eerie chatter stories? Drop Belloware, all listening on this haunted road. David Harlan had spent 22 years mastering the South's winding two-lane highways. His Peterbilt 389, a faithful companion through the humid nights of Tennessee's rural heartland. At 49, he was a grizzled veteran of the long haul, his hands calloused from years of gripping the wheel, his eyes sharp from countless hours scanning for deer or drunks weaving across county roads. He'd hauled lumber, livestock, and machinery through every kind of weather, from summer downpours to winter ice, and faced down near misses with a calm that younger drivers envied. The open road was his domain, its rhythms as familiar as his own heartbeat, the hum of the engine, the flicker of passing mile markers, the occasional CB chatter breaking the silence. David had heard the story's spectral figures on back roads, lights that followed too close, but he dismissed them as yarns spun by drivers with too much time and too little sleep. That changed on a crisp October evening in 2021 near Crossville, Tennessee, when a figure stepped out of the shadows and stared into his soul, leaving him forever wary of the dark stretches he once called home. It was just past 9 p.m., and David was hauling a flatbed load of lumber from Chattanooga to Nashville, a routine run along State Route 68. The road was a narrow, old twisting path through rolling hills and dense woods, the kind of route where you could drive for miles without seeing another soul. The air was cool, the sky clear, with a scattering of stars visible above the tree line. David's Peterbilt rumbled along at a steady 55 miles per hour, the load secure, his fuel gauge steady, and his mind on the diner coffee waiting at his next stop. He'd just passed a faded sign for a long-closed gas station when he noticed a loose tarp flapping on the trailer, its edges catching the wind. Not wanting to risk a fine or a lost load, he scanned for a place to pull over and spotted a wide shoulder near a clearing, flanked by a field of tall grass on one side and a wall of pine trees on the other. It was as good a spot as any, so he eased the rig off the road, the gravel crunching under the tires, and killed the engine, leaving the parking lights on. David grabbed his flashlight and a roll of tie-down straps from the cab, stepping into the cool night air. The The silence was immediate, heavy, broken only by the faint rustle of grass in the breeze and the distant hoot of an owl. The clearing was empty, the fields stretching out under the starlight, the trees looming like silent sentinels. He walked to the trailer, his boots crunching on the gravel, and began securing the tarp, his flashlight beam dancing across the lumber. The task was routine, one he'd done 1,000 times, but something felt off, a prickling at the back of his neck, like he was being watched. He paused, scanning the field, but saw nothing beyond the swaying grass. Shaking it off as nerves, he tightened the last strap and turned back toward the cab. That's when he saw the figure. It stood at the edge of the woods, maybe 50 yards away, half hidden in the shadows where the trees met the clearing. At first, David thought it was a hitchhiker, a common sight on these back roads, but the figure didn't move, didn't wave, didn't call out. It just stood there, a dark silhouette against the pines, its posture unnaturally still. David clicked his flashlight toward it, the beam catching a glimpse of tattered clothing, a faded jacket, jeans worn thin at the knees. The figure's head was tilted slightly, as if studying him, but the face was obscured by shadow. "Hey, you need help," David called, his voice steady but loud, cutting through the night. No response. The figure remained motionless, a statue carved from darkness. David's unease grew. He'd dealt with drifters before, some desperate, some dangerous, but this felt different. He took a step toward the cab, keeping the flashlight trained on the figure. And that's when it moved, not toward him, but sideways, shuffling with an awkward gait, like a puppet with half its strings cut. The movement was wrong, too jerky, too fast for a human. David's heart kicked up a notch, and he called again. "You okay out there?" The figure stopped, its head snapping toward him, and the flashlight caught its face for the first time. David's breath caught. The man, if it was a man, had patchy hair, thin and wild, sticking out like straw. His skin was pale, almost gray, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. But it was the eyes that froze David's blood. Black, empty voids. No whites, no pupils, just twin pits that seemed to pull at him, like staring into a bottomless well. The man's mouth moved, muttering something David couldn't hear, his lips twitching as if arguing with himself. Then, in a sudden burst, he screamed not at David, but at his own hand, holding it up like it was a living thing he despised. "Get back, damn you," the man shrieked, his voice raw, echoing across the clearing. David stumbled back, his flashlight shaking, the beam wavering over the figure. The man's head snapped toward him again, those dead eyes locking onto his, and David felt a pull, not physical, but deeper, like the gaze was trying to drag something out of him, his courage, his sanity, maybe his soul. He clutched the tied-down straps, his knuckles white, and backed toward the cab, not daring to turn away. The man took a step forward, then another, his movements jerky but deliberate, closing the distance. David's mind raced, run, fight, or drive. He reached the cab door, fumbling with the handle, his eyes still on the figure. The man stopped, maybe 20 yards away now, and raised his hand, pointing at David with a finger that looked too long, too thin. "Long walk ahead," the man muttered, his voice low but clear, carrying across the still air. "Long walk, and you're not ready." The words weren't a threat, but they felt like one, heavy with a meaning David couldn't grasp. He yanked the door open, scrambled inside, and slammed it shut, locking it with a trembling hand. He fired up the Peterbilt, the engine roaring to life, and threw it into gear. The tires kicked up gravel as he pulled back onto Route 68, his eyes darting to the mirrors. The figure was gone, the clearing empty, No sign of movement in the trees or field. David's heart pounded as he pushed the truck to 60 miles per hour, the road blurring beneath him. He didn't stop until he reached a brightly lit truck stop in Cookeville, 40 miles away, where the chatter of other drivers and the smell of diesel grounded him back in reality. He checked the trailer tarp secure. No damage, no sign of anyone tampering with the load. But the memory of those eyes clung to him like a shadow he couldn't shake. At the truck stop, David sat in a booth, sipping coffee that tasted like ash, replaying the encounter. He didn't mention it to the other drivers, not wanting to sound like he'd lost his grip. But he overheard snippets of conversation tales of hollow men on southern back roads, figures that appeared and vanished, their eyes wrung, their words cryptic. One old-timer, nursing a plate of eggs, leaned over and said, "Seen something out there, haven't ya? Route 68's got ghosts, boy. Folks who walked too far and never came back." David didn't respond, but the words hit home. He spent the next few days scouring online forums, finding similar accounts, drivers seeing figures with empty eyes, muttering about walks or deaths, always on lonely stretches where the world felt thin. The encounter changed David's relationship with the road. He avoided Route 68 after that, taking longer interstates even if it cost him fuel and time. The Peterbilt, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like a target in the dark, vulnerable to whatever lingered beyond the headlights. He kept a cross on his dash, something he'd never done before, and checked his mirrors obsessively, half expecting to see those black eyes staring back. The highways, he realized, were more than asphalt. They were threads in a tapestry of the unknown, where the dead or something worse walked free, watching from the shadows for those foolish enough to stop. Southern routes ever creep you out? Seen a figure that didn't belong? Share your story below. Hear what haunts your roads. Lisa Chen had spent 15 years slicing through the Southwest's endless deserts. Her Volvo V&L, a trusted steed, on the long hauls from Albuquerque to Phoenix. At 38, she was a master of the overnight run, navigating I-40's barren stretches with a cool precision that earned her respect among freight brokers and fellow drivers alike. She'd faced sandstorms, flash floods, and the occasional reckless RV driver, her reflexes honed to a razor's edge. The desert was her domain, its vast silence a comfort, broken only by the hum of her engine and the soft glow of her dashboard. Lisa had heard the story's phantom lights in the dunes, voices carried on the wind, but she dismissed them as mirages born of heat and exhaustion. That was until July 4th, 2024, when a fire that defied the laws of nature lit up the rain-soaked night, burning a warning into her soul that the desert held secrets no driver could outrun. It was just after 11 p.m., and Lisa was hauling a load of electronics from Albuquerque to Phoenix, a time-sensitive delivery for a tech firm that demanded precision. The night was heavy with a rare monsoon storm, the kind that turned the desert into a battleground of wind and water. Rain lashed her windshield, wipers slapping a frantic rhythm, while thunder rumbled in the distance, low and menacing. I-40 stretched ahead, a slick black ribbon cutting through the scrubland, its edges blurred by sheets of water and the occasional flash of lightning. Lisa's Volvo purred at a steady 60 miles per hour, her high beams piercing the downpour, revealing little beyond the road's white lines and the faint outlines of cacti and rock formations. She was 30 miles west of Grants, New Mexico, in a stretch where towns were scarce and cell service was a gamble. The isolation didn't bother her, she thrived on it, but the storm was testing her focus. the rain so thick it felt like driving through a car wash. She was rounding a gentle curve near mile marker 81 when her headlights caught something impossible. A wall of fire roaring 20 feet high along the roadside, its flames dancing in defiance of the torrential rain. The blaze consumed the soaked scrub and sand, its edges sharp and unnatural, not spreading or dimming despite the deluge. Lisa eased off the gas, her eyes locked on the fire, her mind grappling with the contradiction. Fire didn't burn like that, not in a storm, not on wet ground, not without fuel. There was no lightning strike to explain it, no wreckage of a car or truck, no smell of gasoline or smoke, just flames, vivid orange and red, pulsing with a rhythm that felt alive, like a heartbeat in the dark. Lisa slowed to 40 miles per hour, her wipers struggling to keep up, the fire's glow casting eerie shadows across the cab. She leaned forward, squinting through the rain, trying to make sense of it. The flames didn't flicker or waver like a normal fire. They stood steady, their edges almost geometric, as if drawn by an unseen hand. The heat was palpable, seeping through the sealed windows, warming the cab despite the AC blasting cold air. Her dashboard flickered, the GPS screen glitching, showing her position, jumping miles off course before snapping back to I-40. She checked her mirrors, nothing behind her, no other vehicles, just the endless black of the storm-soaked highway. The fire stretched for maybe 50 yards along the shoulder, its light reflecting off the wet asphalt, creating a mirror image that doubled its intensity. Her first instinct was to stop, to report a hazard, but something deeper, primal warning, urged her to keep moving. She keyed her CB radio, hoping to warn other drivers or get a read on what this was. Westbound, on I-40, near mile marker 81. Anybody copy? Got a fire on the shoulder, burning in the rain. Anyone know what's up? Static answered, thick and unbroken. No voices cutting through. She tried again, switching channels, but the radio stayed dead, an unusual silence for a major interstate. Her phone showed no bars, the satellite signal lost despite the open terrain. The fire loomed closer as the road curved, its heat now pressing against her skin, like standing too close to a bonfire. The flames seemed to shift, not spreading but moving, as if following her truck, their edges curling toward the highway. Lisa's heart pounded, her hands tight on the wheel. She accelerated to 65 miles per hour, the Volvo's engine growling, but the fire kept pace, its glow steady in her peripheral vision. She glanced at the temperature gauge. The cab was climbing, 75 degrees despite the AC, the air growing heavy, almost suffocating. A low hum filled the cab, not from the engine, but from outside, vibrating through the steel frame, like the desert itself was singing. The flames pulsed in time with the sound, their rhythm hypnotic, urging her to slow down, to look closer. She shook her head, forcing her eyes back to the road, but the hum grew louder, words forming in the noise, indistinct, guttural, like a chant from somewhere deep in the earth. She hit 70 miles per hour, the rain a blur, the fire still tracking her. A mile later, she spotted a pull out a small gravel patch near a rusted sign for a long-abandoned diner. She pulled over, tires skidding, and killed the engine, hoping distance from the flames would clear her head. The fire was still visible, maybe a quarter-mile back, burning steady in the downpour. Lisa grabbed her flashlight and stepped out, the rain soaking her instantly, cold and sharp against her skin. She walked to the edge of the pullout, keeping the fire in sight, its light casting long shadows across the wet gravel. The hum was louder out here, resonating in her chest, the words clearer now, but in a language she didn't know, harsh, guttural syllables that felt ancient, angry. She circled the truck, checking for damage, her flashlight beam shaking in her hand. The trailer was fine, the electronics secure, but the air around it felt wrong, charged, like just before a lightning strike. She climbed back into the cab, dripping wet, and tried the CB again. This time, a faint voice broke through the static, an old man's rasp, slow and deliberate. "Don't stop for the fire," it said. "It wants you to look." The voice cut out, replaced by static, and Lisa's blood ran cold. She hadn't mentioned stopping on the radio. She keyed the mic, her voice unsteady. "Who's this? What's the fire?" No answer, just the hum, now joined by a crackling that matched the fire's pulse. Lisa started the truck and pulled back onto I-40, pushing past 75 miles per hour, the speed limit, a distant concern. The fire stayed in her mirrors, its glow fainter but persistent, like a predator keeping pace. The hum followed, vibrating through the cab, the words growing clearer, her name whispered in that same guttural chant, "Lisa, stay." It seemed to say, the sound weaving into the rain's rhythm. She turned up the radio, blasting classic rock to drown it out, but the chant cut through, relentless. The flames began to fade as she neared Gallup, their light swallowed by the storm, but the hum lingered, fading only when she crossed the city limits. At a truck stop in Gallup, Lisa parked under the brightest lights, her hands still trembling as she sipped coffee in the diner. She overheard locals talking about a propane truck crash decades ago on that stretch. Its flames burning through a storm, killing the driver and leaving no wreckage. "Some say it's still out there," a waitress muttered, refilling her cup. "Fire that don't die, calling to folks who pass." Lisa didn't respond, but the words hit home. She scoured forums later, finding tales of desert fires that burned without cause, seen by drivers who felt watched, their names whispered by the wind. Some called it a ghost, others a curse tied to the land's bloodied history. The fire changed Lisa's desert runs. She avoided I-40 at night, sticking to daylight hauls, her Volvo's cab now stocked with salt and sage, gifts from a Navajo driver who swore they kept spirits at bay. The desert, once her refuge, was now a place of unseen eyes, where flames could burn through rain and call her name. The highways, she learned, carried more than cargo. They held memories of tragedies that refused to fade, watching from the dark for those who dared to look. Southwest drivers, seen flames that shouldn't burn. Share your desert scares below. Let's hear what haunts your roots. James Whitaker had braved the Upper Peninsula of Michigan's brutal winters for 12 years. His box truck a lifeline delivering supplies through blizzards and ice-choked roads. At 39, he was a seasoned hauler, his reflexes sharpened by dodging snowdrifts and black ice on M28, his mind steady despite the isolation of the Northwoods. The harsh winters were his proving ground, the silence of snow-covered forests, a comfort broken only by the growl of his engine and the faint crackle of his CB radio. James had heard the tale's ghostly cries in the snow, shadows that moved against the wind, but he brushed them off as stories born of cabin fever and long nights. That was until a frozen January night in 2024, when a scream and a dent from nowhere shook his world, proving the Upper Peninsula's icy highways hid terrors that no amount of grit could outrun. It was just after 2 a.m., and James was hauling medical supplies from Marquette to Sault Ste. Marie, a 150-mile run along M28 through the heart of the Upper Peninsula. The night was bone-chilling, the temperature hovering at -15 Fahrenheit, with a light snow falling, dusting the road with a thin, powdery layer. The forest pressed close on both sides, pines heavy with snow, their branches casting jagged shadows in the glow of his headlights. James's box truck, a sturdy freightliner, rumbled at a cautious 45 miles per hour, the chains on its tires biting into the icy pavement. The cab was warm, the heater blasting, his dashboard a soft glow of gauges, and a thermos of black coffee sat within reach. The road was deserted, no other vehicles in sight, the kind of solitude James relished on these winter runs. He was 30 miles east of Munising, near a stretch of M28 known for its remoteness, where cell service was a myth and the nearest town was a good hour away. The snow fell heavier now, the flakes swirling in his high beams like a curtain of white, reducing visibility to a few hundred feet. James kept his eyes sharp, scanning for wildlife. Deer and moose were common hazards here, but the forest was still, unnaturally so, as if the cold had frozen even the wind. He was passing a cluster of roadkill, a deer half buried in snow, its carcass torn open by wolves, when his dashboard flickered, the gauges dipping erratically. The engine sputtered, a low cough that sent a jolt of adrenaline through him, and then died completely, the truck coasting to a stop on the shoulder. James cursed under his breath visible in the cab, despite the heater. He checked the gauge's fuel was fine, no warning lights, no obvious reason for the stall. He tried the ignition, but the engine only whined, refusing to catch. Outside, the snow fell thicker, the roadkill now a vague shape in the dimming glow of his parking lights. He grabbed his flashlight and bundled up, pulling on a heavy coat and gloves, preparing to check the engine. As he reached for the door, a low howl broke the silence, not the wind, but wolves, their cries sharp and close, circling the roadkill. Their eyes glinted in the dark, maybe a dozen, their forms barely visible through the snow. James hesitated, his hand on the door handle, the predator's presence a warning to stay put. Before he could decide, a scream shattered the night, a woman's voice, high and piercing, coming from directly behind the truck. It wasn't a cry for help, but a wail of raw terror, so loud it seemed to shake the cab. James spun in his seat, flashlight sweeping the sleeper berth, expecting to see someone inside, but it was empty. The curtain still. The scream came again, closer, followed by a massive impact, a deafening thud that rocked the truck on its springs, the metal groaning. James's heart pounded as he aimed the flashlight out the rear window, but the snow and darkness revealed nothing. He flicked on the cab's interior lights, his hands shaking, and checked the mirrors. The wolves scattered, their howls fading as they fled into the forest, as if spooked by something bigger. He climbed out, flashlight in one hand, a crowbar from under the seat in the other, the cold biting his face like needles. The snow was falling hard now, piling up on the road, but he circled the truck, looking for the source of the impact. On the passenger side, he found a dent, 3 feet wide and a foot deep, punched into the cab's roof, 7 feet off the ground. The metal was crumpled inward, as if struck by a sledgehammer, but there were no scratches, no paint transfer, no sign of what hit it. The snow around the truck was undisturbed, no tracks, no debris, just the fresh powder piling up. James's stomach churned. Nothing human could hit that high, that hard, without leaving a trace. He climbed back inside, locking the door, and tried the engine again. This time, it roared to life, the gauges steady, as if nothing had happened. The scream didn't come again, but the air felt charged, heavy, with a presence he couldn't see. He keyed the CB, his voice unsteady. Eastbound on M28, mile marker 112. Anybody copy? Had a situation out here, Static answered, thick and unbroken. No voices breaking through. His phone showed no signal, the GPS blank, as if the road had vanished from the map. James pulled back onto M28, pushing the truck to 50 miles per hour, the snow swirling in his headlights, the dent a constant weight in his mind. The wolves didn't return, but the silence was worse, a void that seemed to watch him. He didn't stop until he reached a truck stop in Sault Ste. Marie. The neon glow of its diner, a lifeline after 90 miles of tense driving. He parked under the floodlights, checking the dent again. No change, still pristine, impossibly clean. Inside the diner, he sat with a coffee, his hands still trembling, and mentioned the scream to a waitress, an older woman with a weathered face. She nodded, unsprings. Folks here, out there, screams from the snow, things hitting trucks, old graves in these woods, restless ones. James didn't reply, but her words lingered. He reported the dent to the police, who confirmed the scream and damage, but found no tracks, no suspects, no explanation. Later, James found forum posts from other drivers' tales of screams in Michigan's winters. Impacts from nowhere, shadows fleeing into the snow. Some called it ghosts of lost travelers, others something older, tied to the frozen land. The experience changed James's runs. He avoided M28 at night, sticking to daylight hauls, his truck now carrying a flare gun and extra batteries. The Upper Peninsula, once his proving ground, was now a place of unseen forces, where screams carried on the wind and the snow hid secrets no driver could face alone. Northern drivers heard cries in the snow that weren't human. Share your winter scares, Balolits. Hear what haunts your icy roads. Sarah Novak had conquered Montana's rugged mountain passes for 14 years. Her Kenworth W900, a steadfast companion through snow, fog, and the biting cold of the Rockies. At 41, she was a force on the road, her instincts honed from navigating treacherous switchbacks and dodging black ice on lonely highways. The solitude of the high country suited Hertz, vast, untamed beauty, a balm against the chaos of city runs. The hum of her engine, the sweep of her headlights across pine-shadowed curves, and the occasional crackle of CB chatter were her world. Sarah had heard the campfire tales, beastly shapes in the wilderness, ghostly rigs on forgotten roads, but she dismissed them as the ramblings of overtired drivers chasing shadows in the dark. That was until a midnight run in November 2022 between Great Falls and Helena, when a figure with a pig's head lunged from the darkness, its malevolent eyes searing into her soul, forever altering her bond with the mountains she once loved. It was just past midnight, and Sarah was hauling a load of machine parts from Great Falls to Helena on US 12, a winding two-lane highway that snaked through the Rockies' forested peaks. The night was cold, the air sharp with the scent of pine and frost. A light snow dusting the road, but not enough to slow her down. Her Kenworth's high beams cut through the dark, illuminating the narrow asphalt and the dense walls of evergreens that loomed on either side, their branches heavy with snow. Sarah was 20 miles west of Great Falls, in a stretch where the road climbed through steep inclines and sharp curves, the nearest town a distant memory. The radio played low, a country tune barely audible over the engine's rumble, and her dashboard glowed softly, the gauges steady. She was making good time, her focus sharp despite the late hour, her thermos of coffee still warm beside her. The road was empty, no headlights or taillights in sight, the kind of solitude Sarah craved. She rounded a tight curve near mile marker 45, her high beams sweeping across a rocky outcrop. When something darted into the light, a figure, human-shaped but wrong, crossing the road with unnatural speed. Sarah slammed on the brakes, the Kenworth's tires squealing as the trailer fishtailed slightly on the slick pavement. The figure froze in the middle of the lane, caught in the full glare of her headlights, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was a man, or so it seemed, dressed in tattered blue coveralls, stained and frayed, like something pulled from a junkyard. But the head wasn't human. It was a pig's head, grotesque and real, with a bristled snout, floppy ears, and small, gleaming eyes that glowed red in the beam. The snout twitched, sniffing the air, and the eyes locked onto hers with an intelligence that was anything but animal. Sarah's hands tightened on the wheel, her heart hammering. The figure didn't move, standing stock still, its gaze boring into her through the windshield. It wasn't a mask. The skin was too lifelike, the muscles moving as the snout flared, the eyes, too aware, filled with a malevolent intent that made her skin crawl. She flicked on her high beams, hoping to startle it, but the figure didn't flinch, its stare unwavering. The air in the cab grew heavy, the temperature dropping despite the heater running full blast. Her dashboard flickered, the radio cutting to static, a low growl weaving through the white noise, like an animal pacing just out of sight. Sarah's instinct screamed to move, to get out of there, but the figure's presence pinned her in place, its eyes pulling at her like a current. She leaned on the horn, the blare echoing through the canyon, hoping to scare it off. The figure reacted not with fear, but with aggression. It lunged toward the truck, moving with a jerky, predatory grace, covering the distance in seconds. Sarah yanked the wheel, swerving to the right, the Kenworth's tires skimming the shoulder's edge, gravel spraying into the ditch. The figure stopped short, inches from the cab, its pig head tilted at an unnatural angle, those red eyes still locked on hers. Its mouth opened, revealing jagged teeth, and it let out a sound, not a squeal, but a deep, guttural rasp, like a human voice twisted into something profane. "Go back," it seemed to say, the words less spoken than felt, vibrating through the cab's steel frame. Sarah floored the accelerator, the Kenworth roaring as it surged forward, the figure vanishing from her headlights as she barreled past. Her mirrors showed nothing but darkness, no sign of the creature, but the weight of its gaze lingered, like a hand on her shoulder. She pushed the truck to 60 miles per hour, the speed limit forgotten, the road's curves demanding every ounce of her skill. The radio stayed dead, the growl replaced by a faint hum that seemed to come from the mountains themselves, a low, resonant drone that pulsed in time with her racing heart. Her phone showed no signal, the GPS frozen, displaying a blank map as if the road didn't exist. The air grew colder, her breath visible in the cab, the heater now useless against the chill that seeped through the windows. She didn't stop until she reached Helena, the city's lights, a beacon of safety after 40 miles of relentless driving. She pulled into a 24-hour truck stop, parking under the brightest floodlights, her hands trembling as she cut the engine. The hum was gone, the air warming, but the memory of those eyes burned in her mind. She checked the truckno marks, no damage, nothing to prove what she'd seen. Inside the diner, she sat with a coffee, her nerves raw, replaying the encounter. A grizzled driver at the counter overheard her muttering and leaned over, his voice low. "Seen the pigman, huh? Old-timers talk about beast things out here. Half man, half something else. They guard the mountains, don't like us passing through." Sarah didn't respond, but the words hit deep. She scoured forums later, finding scattered accounts of beastly figures on Montana's back roads, creatures with animal heads, eyes that saw too much, appearing to drivers who strayed too far from civilization. Some called them spirits of the wild, others remnants of old rituals gone wrong, but all agreed they were a warning. Sarah avoided US 12 after that, sticking to interstates and daylight runs, her Kenworth now equipped with a rosary and a knife she hadn't carried before. The mountains, once her sanctuary, were now a place of hidden eyes, where the line between man and beast blurred in the dark. Rocky Mountain drivers, seen something that wasn't human? Share your beast sightings. Below, let's hear what stalks your peaks. Robert Klein had spent a decade hauling grain through the Midwest's flat, endless fields. His Mac are a reliable beast that carried him across Illinois' heartland with the steady rhythm of a metronome. At 45, he was a seasoned driver, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes sharp from years of spotting hazards, deer darting across I-74, sudden fog banks, or farm equipment clogging narrow roads. The open plains were his refuge, their vastness a comfort, the only sounds the hum of his engine and the occasional crackle of CB chatter. Robert had heard the tall tales, ghostly figures in the crops, lights that moved without a source, but he chalked them up to tired minds and long nights. That was until a full moon night in September 2023, when a shadow in a cornfield near an I-74 exit ramp moved closer with every glance, teaching him that the Midwest's quiet fields hid watchers that no driver could outrun. It was just past midnight, and Robert was hauling a load of soybeans from Champaign to Des Moines, a routine run along I-74's straight, lonely stretch through central Illinois. The night was clear, the full moon casting a silver glow over the harvested fields, their stubble glinting like frost. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of earth and diesel through his cracked window. Robert's Mac rumbled at 60 miles per hour, the cab's interior lit by the soft green of the dashboard, his thermos of coffee half empty beside him. He was 20 miles west of Peoria, in a stretch where farmhouses were miles apart, and the only signs of life were the occasional grain silos looming like sentinels against the horizon. Fatigue was creeping in, his eyelids heavy from 10 hours behind the wheel, so he decided to pull over for a quick nap to stay sharp for the rest of the haul. Near mile marker 67, he spotted a gravel exit ramp leading to a small pullout beside a harvested cornfield, its rows of cut stalks stretching into the darkness. It wasn't an official rest area, but it was quiet, tucked away from the highway's hum, perfect for a couple of hours' rest. Robert eased the Mac off the road, tires crunching over gravel, and parked facing the field, the moon's light bathing the stubble in an eerie glow. He cut the engine, leaving the parking lights on, and checked his mirrors. Nothing but empty road and silent fields. The cab settled into silence. The only sound, the faint tick of the cooling engine and the distant rustle of wind through the corn remnants. He locked the doors, leaned back in his seat, and scrolled his phone for a few minutes, checking the weather and delivery schedule before setting an alarm for 3 a.m. As he dimmed the phone, something caught his eye in the field of shadow, tall and indistinct, standing motionless among the stubble about 100 yards out. At first, he thought it was a scarecrow, a common sight in these parts, but it lacked the rigid posture of a pole-mounted figure. It was humanoid, slightly hunched, its edges blurred in the moonlight, as if it were part of the field itself. Robert squinted, his hand on the flashlight he kept clipped to the console, but he didn't turn it on yet. Probably just a trick of the light, he told himself, or a farmer checking his land. He blinked, looked down at his phone, then back up, and the shadow was closer. Now, maybe 70 yards away, still motionless, but unmistakably nearer. His pulse quickened, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. He hadn't heard footsteps, no crunch of stalks or gravel, nothing to explain the movement. Robert flicked on the flashlight, aiming its beam at the figure, but the light seemed to weaken as it reached the shadow, swallowed by the darkness around it. The figure didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood there, its form still vague, tall, thin, with limbs that seemed to long for a human. He leaned forward, straining to see details, but the moonlight revealed nothing beyond a silhouette, like a hole cut in the night. He glanced at his phone again, checking the time, 12:47 a.m. When he looked back, the shadow was closer still. Now 50 yards out, its posture unchanged, but its presence heavier, like a weight pressing on the air. Robert's mouth went dry. He gripped the flashlight, his other hand hovering over the key in the ignition, debating whether to start the truck and roll. He tried the CB, hoping for a voice to break the tension. Westbound, on I-74, mile marker 67. Anybody copy? Got something weird out here in the field. The radio hissed static, no response, not even the usual chatter from distant drivers. He switched channels, tried again, nothing. His phone showed no signal, despite being in a flat, open area where bars were usually strong. The shadow hadn't moved, but its stillness felt deliberate, like a predator waiting for its moment. Robert's instinct screamed to leave, but he needed to step out for a bathroom break, a necessity he couldn't ignore after hours on the road. He hesitated, the shadow's presence a silent warning, but he grabbed his tire thumper, a heavy steel bar, and a spare flashlight, locking the cab behind him. The night air was cold, the moon's light casting long shadows from the stubble, making the field look like a sea of jagged teeth. Robert kept the shadow in his peripheral vision, not daring to look directly, as if meeting its gaze would invite it closer. He stepped to the edge of the pullout, relieving himself quickly, the thumper in one hand, flashlight sweeping the field. The shadow was still there, now maybe 30 yards away, its form clearer, but still, wrong, too tall, arms hanging low, head tilted at an angle that didn't match a human's. It didn't move, but Robert felt its attention, a pressure that made his skin crawl. He hurried back to the cab, climbing in and locking the door, his breath ragged. He started the Mac, the engine's roar a comfort, and glanced at the field one last time. The shadow was gone, the stubble empty, no trace of movement. His heart pounded as he pulled onto I-74, pushing the truck to 65 miles per hour, the field shrinking in his mirrors. He didn't stop until he reached a brightly lit truck stop in Galesburg, 50 miles away, where the chatter of other drivers and the glare of fluorescent lights felt like a lifeline. He checked the truck, no marks, no damage, nothing to suggest anything had been near. But the shadow's presence lingered, a weight in his chest that didn't fade with the coffee he drank at the diner counter. Over breakfast, Robert overheard drivers talking about field watchers, figures seen in Midwest crops, always at night, always moving closer when unobserved. An older driver, his cap stained with years of road dust, leaned over. Seen one, didn't ya? They don't chase, but they watch. Stay off those ramps after dark. Robert nodded, saying nothing, but the words stuck. He scoured forums later, finding stories of shadows in fields, silent and patient, vanishing when confronted, but leaving drivers shaken. Some called them ghosts of lost farmers, others something older, tied to the land's ancient secrets. the shadow changed Robert's runs. He avoided rural pullouts, sticking to busy rest areas, even if it meant longer drives. His Mac, once a haven, now felt exposed in the open fields, and he kept his flashlights charged, his thumper close. The Midwest's plains, once a place of peace, were now a stage for unseen eyes, watching from the crops, waiting for a moment's inattention. Midwest drivers, seen shapes in the fields that move on their own. Drop your stories, Balalets, hear what's lurking in your heartland. Thomas Reed had hauled produce through the rolling hills from Tennessee to Illinois for 20 years. His Mac Pinnacle, a trusty companion on the winding interstates that cut through the heart of America's South and Midwest. At 47, he was a road-hardened veteran, his hands steady from navigating fog-soaked valleys and his eyes keen from spotting hazards, wildlife, reckless drivers, or sudden storms. The open highway was his lifeblood, its rhythm of mile markers and truck stops a comfort, with the low hum of his engine and the occasional CB chatter his only company. Thomas had heard the spooky stories, ghostly figures on rural routes, strange lights in the fields, but he dismissed them as the exaggerations of tired drivers chasing shadows. That was until a foggy April dawn in 2023, when he crested a hill on I-24 in Tennessee to find a mile-long stretch of carnage that defied nature, teaching him that some roads carried horrors no driver could unsee. It was just before 5 a.m., and Thomas was hauling a refrigerated load of apples from Chattanooga to St. Louis, a familiar run along I-24's twisting path through the Cumberland Plateau. The night was fading into a gray, misty dawn, a dense fog rolling in from the valleys, reducing visibility to a mere 50 feet. The air was damp, heavy, with the scent of wet earth and pine, and the road was slick from an earlier drizzle. Thomas's Mac rumbled at a cautious 55 miles per hour, its headlights struggling to pierce the fog, illuminating only the white lines and the occasional roadside sign. The cab was warm, the heater humming softly, his dashboard glowing with steady gauges, and a half-empty thermos of coffee sat beside him. The highway was quiet, no other vehicles in sight, the solitude of the early hour, a balm after a long night's drive. He was 40 miles west of Chattanooga, near mile marker 134, in a rugged stretch where the road climbed through forested hills and rocky outcrops. The nearest town, a good 20 miles away, the fog thickened, wrapping the landscape in a ghostly shroud, and Thomas slowed to 50 miles per hour, his eyes scanning for deer, a common hazard in these parts. He was cresting a steep hill, the Mac's engine growling under the strain, when the fog parted briefly, revealing a scene that stopped his heart. The road ahead was littered with carnage, hundreds of deer, their bodies exploded across a mile-long stretch, guts and limbs strewn like a slaughterhouse had erupted. Blood painted the asphalt in streaks, organs hung from guardrails, and shattered bones glinted in the headlights. But there were no tire marks, no signs of a crash, no explanation for the devastation. Thomas eased off the gas, his stomach churning, the Mac crawling at 30 miles per hour as he navigated the gruesome scene. The fog seemed to pulse, the air humming with a low, unnatural vibration that made his teeth ache. The deer weren't just dead, they were obliterated, their bodies torn apart as if ripped by an unseen force. Some torsos split open, others reduced to smears of flesh and fur. The stench hit him through the cracked window, a sickly mix of blood and rot, far too strong for fresh kills. He scanned the shoulders, no vehicles, no predators, no tracks in the soft dirt, just the impossible wreckage of animals that looked like they'd been detonated from within. His hands shook as he gripped the wheel, his mind racing for answers. A gas explosion, a rogue hunter with explosives. But the road was pristine. No scorch marks, no debris, just the bodies. Their placement chaotic yet deliberate, like a warning scrawled in blood. He tried the CB, his voice unsteady. Westbound on I-24, mile marker 134. Anybody copy? Got something bad out here. Deer torn up, no cause. Anyone see this? The radio hissed static. No response, not even the usual chatter from distant drivers. His phone showed no signal, the GPS flickering, showing him miles off course before snapping back to I-24. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the cab, a sound like a swarm of insects or a distant chant, wordless but heavy with intent. Thomas pushed through the carnage, the Max tires squelching over blood-slick asphalt, his headlights catching glints of eyes still open, staring blankly from severed heads. The fog seemed to cling to the truck, thicker now, its tendrils curling around the mirrors like fingers. He glanced at the dashboard, the temperature gauge spiked, the cab heating despite the AC, the air growing stifling. A shadow moved in the fog just beyond the headlights, a vague, hulking shape that vanished when he looked directly. His heart pounded. He floored the accelerator, hitting 60 miles per hour, the trailer rattling as he sped through the last of the carnage, the hum following, now a low growl that seemed to come from the road itself. 10 miles later, the fog lifted, the hum faded, and the road was clear, as if the slaughter had never happened. Thomas's hands were clammy, his breath shallow, but he didn't stop until he reached a truck stop in Murfreesboro, 50 miles away, its neon glow a lifeline. He parked under the floodlights, checking the truck. No blood, no fur, nothing to suggest he'd driven through a massacre. Inside the diner, he sat with a coffee, his nerves frayed, and mentioned the scene to a waitress, her face paling. Heard of that stretch, she whispered. Highlanders call it cursed ground, deer dying like that, no reason. Old-timers say the land's angry, spilling blood to warn us off. Thomas didn't respond, but her words sank deep. He called his boss, a veteran hauler, who had no answers, only a grim warning to avoid that stretch at dawn. Online forums later revealed similar accounts, drivers seeing mass animal deaths on I-24. No cause, no traces, the air humming with a curse. Some blamed toxic spills, others spirits of the land, but all felt the same dread. The carnage changed Thomas's runs. He avoided I-24's rural stretches, sticking to urban routes. His Mac now carrying a salt pouch and a flashlight he kept on at dawn. The hills, once a scenic backdrop, were now a place of vengeful earth, where the road itself bled to mark its territory. Southern drivers seen death on the road that didn't add up. Share your eerie sights, Belalits. Hear what haunts your highways. Maria Gonzalez had navigated Idaho's snow-laden forest roads for 16 years. Her international truck, a rugged beast hauling logs through the rugged wilderness of the Northwest. At 44, she was a master of the backwoods, her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes sharp from dodging fallen branches and icy patches on narrow logging routes. The dense forests of the Idaho Panhandle were her domain, their quiet isolation a refuge from the noise of city runs. The rumble of her engine, the crunch of tires on snow, and the faint hum of her CB radio were her constants. Maria had heard the stories, creatures lurking in the timber, shapes that weren't human, but she dismissed them as tales spun by drivers too long in the dark. That was until a midnight run in December 2023, when a grotesque dogman stared at her from the trees, its ancient gaze shattering her sense of safety, proving the woods held watchers no driver could escape. It was just past 1 a.m., and Maria was hauling a load of freshly cut logs from a mill near Coeur d'Alene to a processing plant in Spokane. A 70-mile run along a remote Forest Service road off US 95. The night was bitter, the temperature dipping to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, with a steady snow falling, blanketing the road in a soft, powdery layer. The forest loomed close, towering pines and firs, creating a tunnel of dark green, their branches sagging under the weight of snow. Maria's International growled at a cautious 40 miles per hour, its headlights carving a narrow path through the swirling flakes, illuminating the rutted road and the occasional glimpse of a frozen stream. The cab was warm, the heater humming, her dashboard casting a faint glow over the gauges, a thermos of tea steaming beside her. The road was hers alone, no other vehicles in sight. The silence of the woods, a comfort she'd come to love. She was 20 miles from the mill, deep in a stretch where the forest thickened and cell service was a distant memory, when her headlights caught a glimpse, something reflective, like eyes, low to the ground near the tree line, her instincts kicking in. Wildlife was common here, and a moose or bear could wreck a truck, but the shape wasn't right. It was too small for a bear, too upright for a deer, standing just inside the forest, maybe 30 yards off the road. She flicked her high beams, the light piercing the snow, and froze. The figure was grotesque, a creature, with the torso of a dog, fur matted and gray, but standing on spindly, human-like legs, its arms thin and elongated, ending in claw-like hands. Its head was canine, with pointed ears and a long snout, but the eyes were wrong large, glowing with a sickly yellow, radiating an intelligence that felt ancient, predatory. Maria's heart thudded, her hands gripping the wheel. The creature didn't move, its gaze locked on her, unblinking, as if sizing her up. The snow seemed to part around it, the flakes avoiding its form, creating a clear halo in the storm. The air in the cab grew heavy, the heater's warmth fading, replaced by a chill that seeped through the windows. Her radio crackled, spitting static, though she hadn't touched it, and a low whine filled the cab, like a dog's growl, but deeper, resonating in her chest. She checked her mirrors, nothing behind, just the dark tunnel of trees, but the creature's presence felt like a weight, pressing on her mind, urging her to stop, to look closer. She leaned on the horn, the blare cutting through the night, hoping to scare it off. The creature tilted its head, the motion unnervingly human, and took a single step toward the road, its claws glinting in the headlights. Maria's breath caught. She shifted into gear, easing the truck forward, not daring to take her eyes off it. The creature matched her pace, moving parallel through the trees, its long limbs bending at odd angles, keeping just inside the forest's edge. Its eyes never left her, their yellow glow piercing the snow, and the whine on the radio grew louder, forming a single word: Maria. Her name, spoken in a guttural rasp, sent a shiver down her spine. She hadn't used her name on the CB, only her handle, Timber Queen. She pushed the truck to 45 miles per hour, the logs shifting slightly in the trailer, the road's ruts testing her control. The creature kept pace, gliding through the trees, its movements silent despite the snow and underbrush. The radio's whine became a chant, her name repeated in a voice that wasn't human, weaving through the static like a signal from nowhere. Her phone showed no bars, the GPS frozen, displaying a blank screen as if the forest had erased itself. The creature darted closer, now 15 yards from the road, its snout twitching, as if scenting her fear. Maria floored it, hitting 50 miles per hour, the truck rattling over the uneven road. But the creature didn't falter, its eyes a constant in her peripheral vision, its form flickering in and out of the trees like smoke. 10 miles from Spokane, the forest thinned, and the creature stopped, standing motionless at the edge of the road, its gaze still locked on her. Maria's mirrors showed it fading into the trees, its form dissolving into the snow, but the weight of its stare lingered, heavy and ancient. The radio fell silent, the cab warming, but her hands shook as she gripped the wheel. She didn't stop until she reached the Spokane plant, parking under the yard's floodlights, the glow a shield against the dark. She checked the truck, no marks, no signs of pursuit, but the memory of those eyes burned in her mind. At a nearby diner, she sipped coffee, her nerves raw, and mentioned the creature to a fellow driver, an old logger with a scarred face. "Woodland guardians," he muttered. "They watch the forests, don't like us cutting their trees. You saw one, you're marked now." Maria scoured forums later, finding tales of dog-like creatures in the Northwest's woods, seen by loggers and drivers, their eyes to knowing, their presence a warning. Some called them spirits of the land, others remnants of forgotten myths, but all agreed they were protectors, hostile to intruders. Maria avoided that forest road after that, sticking to major highways, her international now carrying a sage bundle and a steel crowbar. The woods, once her haven, were now a realm of ancient eyes, watching from the trees, waiting for those who trespassed. Northwest drivers, seen creatures in the timber that weren't right. Share your forest scares below. Let's hear what stalks your roots. John Doe had been hauling freight through Colorado's high country for 17 years. The mountains were his sanctuary, their rugged silence a contrast to the chaos of lowland routes, with only the growl of his engine and the faint crackle of his CB radio for company. John had heard the eerie tales, phantom animals, ghostly lights on cliffs, but he scoffed at them, blaming overactive imaginations and long hours. That was until a late-night stop in February 2024 at a remote Colorado truck stop, when two wolves with unnatural eyes climbed onto his hood, their gaze piercing his soul, proving the wilderness held secrets no driver could outrun. It was just after 11 p.m., and John was hauling auto parts from Denver to Grand Junction. The night was frigid, the temperature at 5 degrees Fahrenheit, with a light snow dusting the highway, creating a soft shimmer in his headlights. The road wound through pine forests and rocky crags, the mountains looming like silent giants under a starlit sky. John's Freightliner purred at 55 miles per hour, its chains biting into the icy pavement, the cab warm with the heater humming, its dashboard casting a faint glow over the gauges. A thermos of coffee sat beside him, its steam curling in the cold air seeping through a cracked window. He was 30 miles west of Idaho Springs, in a desolate stretch where the forest pressed close and the nearest town was an hour away, when fatigue tugged at his eyelids, prompting him to seek a rest stop. Near mile marker 213, he spotted a small truck stop, a gravel lot with a single flickering neon sign, tucked against a dense forest of pines and aspens. It wasn't much, just a few parking spaces and a shuttered diner, but it was enough for a quick nap. John pulled in, tires crunching over snow-dusted gravel, and parked facing the trees, the moon's light filtering through the branches, casting jagged shadows across the lot. He cut the engine, leaving the parking lights on, and checked his mirrors. Nothing but empty road and silent woods. The quiet was deep, broken only by the faint tick of the cooling engine and the occasional creak of branches in the wind. He locked the doors, leaned back in his seat, and set an alarm for 2 a.m., intending to rest his eyes for a couple of hours. As he settled in, a heavy thud jolted him awake, something landing on the hood, the truck rocking slightly on its springs. John's eyes snapped open, his hand reaching for the flashlight clipped to the console. Another thud followed, softer but deliberate, like a second weight joining the first. He flicked on the cab's interior light, his heart pounding, and leaned forward to peer through the windshield. 2 wolves stood on the hood, their massive forms illuminated by the parking light's gray fur, matted with snow, muscles taut, each the size of a large dog but heavier, more primal. Their eyes were wrong, glowing an unnatural silver, not reflecting light but radiating it, like twin moons staring directly into his soul. They didn't growl, didn't bare their teeth, just stood motionless, their gaze unblinking, pinning John in his seat with a weight that felt almost physical. His breath caught, his hand hovering over the horn, but he hesitated, afraid to provoke them. The wolves didn't move, their silver eyes locked on his, their stillness more menacing than any snarl. The air in the cab grew colder, the heater's warmth fading, a chill seeping through the glass, as if the wolves' gaze carried the mountain's frost. The radio, switched off, crackled to life, spitting a low hum that wasn't static, but a rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat echoing from the forest. John's phone showed no signal, the GPS blank, as if the truck stop existed outside the world. He tried the CB, his voice shaky. Westbound on I-70, mile marker 213. Anybody copy? Got wolves on my truck, acting weird. The hum deepened, drowning his words, and no response came, not even static. One wolf shifted, its claws scraping the hood, leaving no marks but sending a shiver through the steel. The other tilted its head, its eyes narrowing, as if judging him, weighing something deeper than his presence. John's skin crawled. These weren't animals, they felt ancient, aware, like guardians of the wild, sizing up an intruder. He leaned on the horn, the blare shattering the silence, but the wolves didn't flinch, their gaze unbroken, their bodies rooted to the hood. The hum grew louder, now a low chant, wordless but heavy, vibrating through the cab, urging him to stay, to meet their eyes. He flicked on the headlights, the beams washing over them, but their silver eyes seemed to absorb the light, glowing brighter, unyielding. John's hand moved to the ignition, his instinct screaming to drive. But the wolves' stare held him, a pull that was both terrifying and hypnotic. He forced his eyes away, starting the engine, the Freightliner roaring to life. The wolves didn't move, even as the truck vibrated beneath them. He eased into gear, inching forward, expecting them to leap off, but they stayed, claws gripping the hood, their gaze never wavering. He accelerated, hitting 10 miles per hour in the lot, and finally, they leaped down, landing silently in the snow, their forms fading into the trees like smoke. John's mirrors showed nothing but darkness, no tracks, no glint of eyes, but the weight of their stare lingered, heavy in his chest. He didn't stop until he reached a bustling truck stop in Glenwood Springs. 70 miles away, its lights a beacon of safety. He checked the hood, no scratches, no fur, nothing to prove the wolves had been there. Inside the diner, he sat with a coffee, his nerves raw, and mentioned the encounter to a grizzled driver nursing a burger. "Mountain guardians," the man said, his voice low. "Wolves that ain't wolves, watching the roads. They judge who passes through. You're lucky they let you go." John didn't reply, but the words sank in. He scoured forums later, finding tales of wolves with unnatural eyes in Colorado's mountains, seen by drivers who felt judged, their presence a warning from the wild. The wolves changed John's runs. He avoided remote stops on I-70, sticking to well-lit rest areas, his Freightliner now carrying a flare gun and extra batteries. The Rockies, once his refuge, were now a place of ancient watchers, their silver eyes waiting in the dark for those who lingered too long. Colorado drivers, seen animals that looked to knowing. Share your mountain scares below. Let's hear what stalks your roads.